Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to completely demystify the complexities of the Singapore property market. If you've ever looked up at the Singapore skyline, or maybe just browsed property listings and felt totally overwhelmed by the sheer scale and all that jargon, well, you are definitely in the right place. Today, we're taking official study guide data straight from the Real Estate Agency Industry Overview, and we're breaking down exactly how this market ticks. We're going to take all that dense market data and those heavy legal concepts and turn them into crystal clear, actionable takeaways.
So here's our game plan for today. First, the nature of real estate. Then, market forces and cycles. Third, Singapore's property landscape. Fourth, tracking market trends. And finally, number 5, players and the rulebook.
All right, starting off with Section 1, the nature of real estate, understanding the core asset.
Before we talk about Singapore specifically, we have to ask, what are we actually trading here? Well, in law, it's called real property, and it's defined as permanent and immovable properties. That means the land itself, the buildings constructed on it, and literally anything permanently affixed to that land. Seriously, legally speaking, even a mature tree planted in the front yard counts. So you aren't just buying space, you are buying a permanent piece of the earth and everything anchored to it, which is, vastly different from buying stocks or bonds.
And here's the thing, those physical traits directly dictate the economic reality. Because a property is physically immobile, like you can't just pick up a building and move it to a trendier neighborhood, right? It's economically illiquid. And because it's physically indivisible, meaning you can't just say sell off a square meter of your kitchen to raise some quick cash, you end up with high transaction costs. Plus, every single unit of real estate is completely heterogeneous. It's totally unique in its location and design. That makes the market inherently imperfect, and it means you really have to be hands-on with management.
Because of these quirks, investing in real estate is a pretty high-stakes game. On the pro side, you've got fantastic potential for capital growth, the ability to use leverage through bank loans, great tax benefits since there's zero capital gains tax on property in Singapore, and of course, direct control over your asset. But take a look at the cons. It requires a massive initial capital outlay. It's incredibly illiquid compared to just hitting sell on a stock app. You have to deal with management fees, maintenance, and the unavoidable reality of market fluctuations. As we go through this explainer, I want you to keep asking yourself, do these trade-offs actually align with your personal goals?
Moving right along to Section 2, market forces and cycles. Basically, the rhythm of real estate.
Take a look at this. It's the entire market captured in a single X. This is the classic economic curve showing supply meeting demand. Now, the real secret of real estate is that, in the short run, supply is stubbornly inelastic. It takes years to plan and pour concrete for a new building. So, when that demand curve shifts upward, maybe because of low interest rates or a population boom, but the supply curve just can't move fast enough to catch up, prices inevitably shoot up. And boom, you've got a seller's market.
And that constant dance between supply and demand creates a very predictable cycle, unfolding in 4 sequential steps. It starts with expansion. That's sustained demand, high transaction volumes, rising prices. Everyone's happy. But eventually, developers overbuild, which leads to step 2, decline. Suddenly, we see oversupply, tighter credit from the banks, and falling demand. That drags the whole market down into step 3, recession, high vacancy, falling prices. But finally, we hit step 4, recovery, where confidence slowly creeps back, interest rates drop, and demand sparks up again. Think about this logically for a second. Why might a savvy investor deliberately choose to sit on a pile of cash during the decline phase, just waiting to buy at the absolute bottom of the recession trough? In this game, timing the cycle is everything.
Okay, Section 3, Singapore's property landscape. Let's look at the forms and classifications. Let's zoom in on Singapore now, starting with the absolute pinnacle of low-density residential living, the detached house, or bungalow. This is a freestanding house with its own boundary and absolutely zero common walls with neighbors. Now, to be a standard bungalow, the plot has to be above 400 square meters. But the ultimate tier here is the good-class bungalow. These require a massive minimum plot size of 1,400 square meters. To put that into perspective, that is roughly the size of 3 entire basketball courts, and they're restricted to just 39 specific areas on the island.
Moving down the density scale just a bit, we have the semi-detached house. This is a nice compromise between space and density. It shares exactly one common wall with a similar immediate unit, but crucially, each half of the pair is legally considered a totally separate property with its own title.
For a developer to build one of these, the minimum plot size must be at least 200 square meters.
Next up, terrace houses. These are defined as a unit in a row of at least 3 dwelling houses, all joined together by common boundaries. So each house has its own sidewalls and roof, but shares party walls with its neighbors. Notice the end units here? Those are known as corner terrace houses. They only have one shared party wall and, as a nice bonus, they usually get much larger garden areas than the intermediate units sandwiched in the middle.
Now, the Urban Redevelopment Authority, or URA, mandates some very strict minimum plot dimensions. You can't just build whatever you want wherever you want. A good class bungalow demands a minimum width of 18.5 meters, whereas an intermediate terrace house only needs a width of 6 meters and a total size of 150 square meters. Anchoring our understanding to this hard data is absolutely crucial, because these zoning rules directly dictate land value and future development potential.
All right, moving to Section 4, Tracking Market Trends. Let's map out the data.
To track the data, we first really need to map the market geographically. Singapore is segmented into 3 main areas. Right in the middle, in orange, is the core central region, the CCR. This is where you find the premium postal districts like 9, 10, 11, the downtown core, and Sentosa. Surrounding that, in gray, is the rest of Central Region, or RCR, and pretty much everything else in white. The East, Northeast, North, and West regions makes up the outside Central Region, the OCR. When you read about property data in Singapore, it is almost always filtered through these 3 distinct geographical zones.
Now here is where we actually see those market cycles in action. The URA Property Price Index literally translates market sentiment into hard lines on a chart. Just look at the dramatic dips and those incredible peaks for residential, office, and retail spaces over the years. These lines are a direct reflection of broad economic confidence. They show exactly when the market was riding that expansion phase we talked about and exactly when it suffered a recessionary decline.
And it's not just residential and commercial spaces being tracked. Industrial sector data, provided by JTC Corporation, meticulously separates single-user factories from multiple-user factories. What this shows us is that the Singapore real estate market isn't just one big monolith, right? It's composed of highly specialized submarkets, each with their own unique supply and demand dynamics that investors have to monitor closely.
Finally, we literally cannot talk about tracking trends without looking at the absolute heartbeat of Singaporean housing, the HDB Resale Price Index. Public housing makes up the vast majority of homes in Singapore. Looking at this historical trajectory reveals the immense scale and, honestly, the consistent long-term value growth of public housing flats. That growth is driven by a mix of incredibly steady demand and some highly calibrated government policies.
Which brings us to our final section, number 5, Players and the Rulebook, Governing the Market.
Here is the alphabet soup of government agencies that control this entire ecosystem. The Ministry of National Development, the MND, oversees it all. Below them, the URA handles zoning, the HDB manages public housing, and the Singapore Land Authority, the SLA, handles the actual legal land registration. On the safety and money side of things, the BCA ensures buildings are actually safe to occupy, and the MAS regulates your banking mortgages. Basically, you can't make a single move in this market without crossing paths with at least one of them.
And to play by the rules of these agencies, you really have to lock in a basic, foundational legal concept. We touched on this earlier, the strict distinction between real property and personal property. Remember our definition? Real property laws, which these agencies strictly enforce, only apply to permanent, immovable assets, the land, the factories, the houses. They absolutely do not apply to personal property, which are movable goods, chattels, like cars or furniture. Getting this legal distinction right in your head is step 1 before signing any contract.
Wow, we have covered some incredible ground in this explainer. From the rigid physical constraints of land, to fluid economic cycles, right down to precise URA zoning rules and the government agencies pulling the levers. So, I'm going to leave you with a question to ponder. Now that you have this masterclass overview, how will you leverage your understanding of these market cycles, these strict government rules, and these distinct property types to navigate the market and unlock real estate wealth? The data is all there. The rules are perfectly clear. The next move is yours. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive.